How can government stamp out the Muslim child rape gangs without dirtying its hands or undermining the rule of law? Firstly, government needs to detect this crime, which it isn't doing. The British government has described this industrial scale crime as a national threat, and that means that if this crime is reported, it can be investigated like organised crime. But government needs to go further and to classify this crime as a national security threat on the grounds of its viciousness, its genocidal motivation, and the violent vigilantism that it will provoke. This would enable governments then to root for it aggressively without having to wait for a report to come in. First, by mapping phone use, who networks with who, where and when. Second, by automated surveillance like face, vehicle and voice recognition. And third, by squeezing suspects for information. And this should be possible without having to resort to inhuman or degrading treatment, because these men are weak and stupid, and if squeezed will talk. And the problem can then be fully assessed and contained. Second, government is not preventing this crime, and it needs to do more to do so. It isn't using the legislation which is intended to make it easier for girls like the victims of these crimes to report and testify against these men. The Children's Act of 1989 provides that the child's welfare supersedes the adult's welfare in all court proceedings, and this simply isn't being followed, as witness the suicide attempts that some of these girls have made after the trauma of giving evidence against these child rapists. 10 years later, in 1999, an Act of Parliament was passed which allowed the screening of evidence from a witness, and also evidence given by live link, evidence given in private, video recorded evidence and video recorded cross-examination. And yet this isn't being used, it isn't being applied. Why? The government is not preventing this crime adequately. It needs to let individuals prevent it, and that is a right under English law. It is the right under English law to use reasonable force to prevent a crime. And the question being, what is reasonable? Government needs to clarify that lethal force constitutes reasonable force when preventing this crime. In this particular instance, that's not vigilantism as commonly understood, which is in general revenge attacks after the event. This, what I'm proposing, would stop vigilantism by preventing this crime in the first place. And this would be lawful in the United States, where most states have stand your ground laws and castle laws. And it's also been contemplated in Britain against burglars, where most people would agree that the gang rape of a child is a lot more serious than having your TV stolen by a drug addict. But without the law's blessing, this would fail. It needs the law's blessing, otherwise it would lead to misdirected revenge attacks after the event. And that creates unnecessary suffering, which is the definition of cruelty. These people may follow a vicious and barbaric religion and ideology, and that may make them our enemy, but they're still able to suffer, and causing needless suffering is cruelty, and that is screwed up. Wrong answer. Thirdly, the government needs to punish this crime effectively, which isn't happening. Now, I'm against executing these genocidal child rapists because that dirties our hands too much. That crosses a line. Besides, these men have value to us as material on which to demonstrate the aggression of our resolve. The sting, the public anger which is likely to come, needs to be taken out of this line of offending by putting these men through the process of hard labour, the mincing machine of hard labour. And that would serve the 5 commonly accepted aims of the criminal law, which a few years in a halal jail can't serve. Firstly, rehabilitation, by processing these men into harmless shells. Secondly, restoration, by devoting any profits of their hard labour to the victims of their crimes. Thirdly, deterrence, by turning these men into objects of pity, so that when they get out, their teeth are falling out, their eyesight is failing, they can count to 20 but not much more, and they're able to wander down to the shops and act as walking warnings to friends and close relatives. Fourthly, through incapacitation, by preventing or ending, putting a stop to their ability to rape anything. And fifthly, by retribution, because people need to see wrongdoers suffer proportionately. That is not revenge, that is just and appropriate. I would add a sixth aim to that, which is a civilizational aim, which applies to this particular crime. That is to warn civilizational enemies now and in the future. You don't know when they're going to come, they may come decades or centuries hence, and they need to be warned. Don't think about it. This is what we will do to you. And don't fool yourselves about the backward brutality of such measures. If we don't get a grip on this criminality, on these crimes, we'll see far more backward and brutal measures employed than this. And if you don't believe me about that, just read Peter McLaughlin's book Easy Meat and see how you feel at the end of it.
That County 911 state your emergency.
I need an ambulance.
Okay.
I need an ambulance. This guy was raping my daughter, and I beat him up, and I don't know what to do.
Okay. Is this Daniel?